Hey there, and welcome back to Start Adventuring, a channel dedicated to empowering new roleplayers to break down their barriers and just start adventuring. I'm Baxter.
And I'm Ben. And in this video, we'll be talking about 3 lessons that we learned from running the 10th adventure in the Candlekeep Mysteries, Kandlekeep Dekonstruktion, but all the C's are K's.
Yeah.
These are the lessons that we learned about running the adventure from doing it as a one-on-one, single-session adventure, and hopefully it's useful to you if you run this adventure at your table, however you choose to run it. So if you enjoy what we talk about here, be sure to like the video and consider subscribing to the channel. But without any further ado, let's jump right into the lessons.
Let's get into it.
The first lesson that we learned is that it's really important with this adventure to have a clear idea in your head what the motivations are for the barn door cult, the authority structure at Candlekeep, and even kind of how the players fit into those two factions going against each other in this adventure.
Right.
Especially with having specific ideas for characters and what they're doing during the adventure so that there's something for the players to kind of push up against.
Right. I think that when we were kind of discussing this, the main thing that came to light was you didn't really know what the cult was planning on doing. You didn't really know how Candlekeep felt about it. There wasn't really, like, the moral question that I think is kind of buried in this story a little bit. There isn't enough weight behind your decision making or even the narrative itself so much to even expound on what exactly that morality question is, or if it's even a legitimate question. Do you know what I'm saying? That
Right.
being the idea that there's some, working class that is maybe being overlooked or oppressed, and so they are in retaliation doing this thing. Like, I just don't know if that's super well, like, I don't know if that's communicated very well. And frankly, I'm not even sure that that's 100% what the module is fixated on. That just seems like the basic narrative that it pushed, right?
Yeah, I think that when you're prepping this as a DM, it's very important for you at least to be clear on what's going on,
Right.
Because the stakes of it, in order for because the players are only going to get some limited amount of that information, but if it isn't clear to you, if you're trying to prep this and you need to pick, the few things that are the most important, really understanding what is this cult, what are they about, and what's their relationship to this book. You may need to do some work to clarify that
Definitely.
for yourself beyond just what you read in the module.
Yes, absolutely. It's something that you will probably have to, kind of artificially construct. But that doesn't mean that it's, in a lot of ways, that gives you the ability to have it have a more deep connection with your campaign or with maybe whatever the overarching narrative of the one shot that you're designing is.
Right. And it's not that you presuppose what your player's motivation is,
right.
But without having the motivations of the factions clear, your players won't, like you said, they won't have clarity about what they're contributing to with their actions, you know?
Exactly. Our second lesson is that you need to find a way to balance the discovery phase and the timed phase. Namely, the discovery phase being the player characters kind of figuring out what exactly is happening here with the cult, with Candlekeep, etc. And then the timed phase being whatever triggers the countdown for the rocket. Because as written, they kind of play against each other, and the timed phase loses a lot of oomph because the players don't even really know that they're in a timed phase.
Yeah, it's especially to do with the pacing of the adventure, right? Because there are two very cool parts, but they're separate in terms of how kind of they ought to be paced, right? There's this whole very cool conspiracy theory, and depending on how you prepare that, there might be all these breadcrumbs to learn what's going on, and then there's this moment of realization of what's going on that hopefully coincides with the countdown to the rocket. But, like, if the players don't know the information by the time you trigger the countdown to the rocket, they don't know what's being counted down to, they don't understand the stakes, and then the ticking clock doesn't mean anything to them anymore. So that tension and figuring out how you're going to prepare to handle meeting out information and telling the players what's going on, or having ways for them to discover what's going on, is really integral to the pacing of this adventure and how you're going to prep to do it.
Right. I think the real thing that we decided is that this module specifically, if you can give it a few sessions so that the players can kind of naturally discover what's going on, and then maybe put the timed phase behind as soon as they get into the room with the rocket, or they get into the rocket, they're locked in there and it becomes an escape room, escape the rocket before it takes off. That's maybe a little bit more railroaded or presupposed, I guess. Whereas in a different, as written, it's supposed to be a little bit more up to the player, or else, real consequences occur, kind of a thing.
I think it really has to do with how many sessions you have to run it, right? Because if you're trying to run it in one session like we did, how easy it is to learn what's going on, the bar has to be lower. Or else, once the earthquake happens and the rocket's taking off, you really have to just dump all of that information on the players to get that race against the clock feeling to have any meaning for them.
Exactly. And the issue is, between that balance, the more you just kind of lore dump on your player characters, the less invested they'll be in the outcome or the situation, because they just feel like they were told something and told to make a decision. But it is imperative to the timed phase that they have all the information, or at least most of the information. So having that discovery phase last long enough for the player characters to feel comfortable in their grounding of what's going on in the timed phase, because otherwise...
And to feel like they earned the information, they earned the drama of it.
Exactly, because if you have the discovery phase as, they meet Bookworm and he tells them everything, which is as kind of ish what I did, in order to expedite things, I feel like the PC just doesn't get the, there's no stakes for them. There's no emotional attachment. They're just told something and they're like, okay, well, I guess I'm doing that. So again, just finding that balance and really trying to play the discovery phase to get the player characters invested, and then the timed phase as the payoff at the end.
The third lesson that we came up with in running and discussing this adventure is that it is important, as with any of these mysteries, but especially with this one, because you want to get to that exciting clock-ticking moment of, we know what's going on and we need to stop it. It's important to have some kind of back pocket emergency way to sort of point your players in the direction of at least the most vital pieces of information. The key thing here is that nothing would be worse for the player that I can imagine than the rocket takes off at the end of your one-shot session and the players had no idea what was going on and they had no ability to stop it because they didn't know who was doing what and what was going on.
Right. The sense of urgency doesn't feel very clear here. The as written in the module, they're kind of like I would say their emergency plan, or their triggering event that's supposed to kind of elevate the urgency, is the earthquake. But the earthquake in and of itself lacks complete context. Even in the module, it's supposed to be like this, how did this earthquake happen kind of a thing. But like the player wouldn't really have much, sure, it's spooky and it's weird and it, natural disaster, but it's not like Candlekeep goes into lockdown. It's not like anyone seems like, this is an immediate terror threat kind of a thing. If there was maybe, and it's not even like you had said, emergency ways to give information, yes, but it's in some ways, to me, is less about like giving them a direct piece of information and more direction on like where not to go, almost like, okay, Candlekeep's closed down, you have to stay in Candlekeep. There's an immediate threat.
Even direct implication of the PCs in the sort of drama between these two factions.
If they had the book, if they're given the book like the module says, totally, they could be implicated in, hey, we know what that book is, what do you know about what's going on, kind of a thing.
Right. And this sort of loops back to the previous lesson about having a clear motivation for the two factions, right? So based on those motivations that you've come up with, think of ways that you might hook the players into that drama if they don't come up with it themselves, if they don't seem invested themselves. Because if the stakes aren't there by the time the rocket's going to take off and the clock is ticking, then really the whole payoff of the adventure is lost.
Right. I remember reading as written that when you give the Avowed back the book, if that's what you choose to do, they act very like they're happy and excited and kind of quizzical of how you got it, but they're very like nonchalant about it in terms of like they're just like, okay, cool, thanks. I guess because they don't want you to know too much because you're just a rando or whatever. But like, part of me feels like just get rid of that, because then that unless the it's going to be over multiple sessions where you can, again, pay homage to that and build that kind of deflection into something more tangible and realistic. It just feels like that's not how they would act.
We completed the mission.
Yeah.
We gave the book back and that's it. You know, and then again, you end up at that end state where the the building blasts off and
right.
Okay, I guess, you know?
Exactly. This specific lesson, I think, plays in very well with, like you said, the first lesson and also the second lesson in terms of like, if the discovery phase is going on for a little too long, think about maybe, you know, trying to find a way to lead your players to water, so to speak. That'll do us this time. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this, give it a like. If you haven't subscribed, please do. We love to have the family grow here, and, you know, seeing anybody interested in what we're doing is the bee's knees for us. If you run this adventure, please comment. Tell us how it goes. We love to kind of keep that conversation alive and going. It's always interesting to hear how other people ran the adventure.
Yeah, and you can see us run through our shortened version of it here on the channel. That live play is somewhere on the channel. There's probably a link to it that'll pop up right after this bumper.
Yep.
And also, the points in these lessons come out of longer discussions that Baxter and I have over on our Patreon. Mm-hmm. So if that's something you'd be interested in listening to and you want to help support the channel even more, there's a link to that in the description down below. We'd love if you check it out. But that'll be everything for this. We hope that it helps you a little bit and that you enjoyed this video. And until next time, I'm Ben.
And I'm Baxter. And remember, start adventuring.
Just start adventuring.